Citra awoke in a cabin, and for a moment, though she thought she might have hallucinated all of it. The Thunderhead, the revival center, the car ride in the snow, for that moment, she thought she was still in the rooftop residence of the High-Blade Xenocrates, waiting for the torture to begin. But no, the light here was different, and the wood in the cabin around her was a lighter shade. Outside the window, she could see snowy mountains closer than they were before, although the flurries had stopped. Scythe Curie came in a few minutes later with a tray and a bowl of soup. Good. You're awake. I trust you've healed enough over the past few hours to be a little more coherent and a little less miserable. Coherent, yes, Citra said. Less miserable? No, just a different kind of misery. Citra sat up, feeling only a little bit loopy now, and Scythe Curie put the tray with a large bowl of soup in her lap. It's a chicken soup recipe passed down for more generations than anyone remembers, she told Citra. The soup looked fairly standard, but there was a round moonlight mass in the middle. What's that? The best part, said Scythe Curie. A sort of dumpling made from the ground crumbs of unleavened bread. Citra tried the soup. It was flavorful and the moon ball unique and memorable. Comfort food, thought Citra, because somehow it made her feel safe from the inside out. My grandmother said it could actually heal a cold. What's a cold? Asked Citra. A deadly illness from the mortal age, I suppose. It was amazing to think that someone only 2 generations older than Scythe Curie could have known what it was like to be mortal, fearing for her life on a daily basis, knowing that death was a certainty rather than an exception. Citra wondered what Scythe Curie's grandmother would think of the world now, where there was nothing left for her soup to cure. When the soup was done, Citra stilled herself for what she knew she must tell the Scythe. There's something you need to know, Citra said. Xenocrates showed me something he said Scythe Faraday wrote. It was his handwriting, but I don't know how he could have written it. Scythe Curie sighed. I'm afraid he did. Scythe, but why would he write that? He said I wanted to kill him, that I was plotting horrible things. None of that was true. Scythe Curie offered Citra the slimmest of grins. He wasn't talking about you, Citra, she explained. He wrote that about me. When Faraday was still a junior Scythe, all of 22 years old, he took me on as an apprentice at Scythe Curie. I was 17 and full of righteous indignation at the world that was still heaving in the throes of transformation. Immortality had been a reality for barely 50 years. There was still discord and political posturing, even the fear of the Thunderhead, if you could imagine that. Fear of it? Who could possibly be afraid of the Thunderhead? People who had the most to lose. Criminals, politicians, organizations that thrive on the oppression of others. The point was, the world was still changing, and I wanted to help it change faster. Both Scythe Faraday and I were of similar minds about that, which I suppose is why he took me on. We were both driven by a desire to use gleaning as a way of hacking through the thicket to open a better path for humanity. Oh, you should have seen him in those days, Citra. You've only seen him old. He likes to remain that way to keep himself from being too tempted by a younger man's passions. Scythe Curie smiled as she spoke about her former mentor. I remember I would wait outside his door at night, listening to him as he slept. I was 17, I remember, childish in so many ways. I thought myself in love. Wait, you were in love with him? Infatuated. He was a rising star who took a wide-eyed girl under his wing, even though in those days he only gleaned the wicked. He did it with such compassion he melted my heart each time. Then she sobered a bit, looking a bit sheepish, which was a strange expression for steely Scythe Curie. I actually worked up the nerve to go into his room one night, determined to climb into his bed and be with him. But he caught me halfway across to his bedroom floor. Oh, I made up some silly excuse as to why I was there. I was coming in to retrieve his empty glass or something like that. He didn't believe me for an instant. He knew I was up to something, and I couldn't look him in the eye. I thought he knew. I thought he was wise and could see into my soul. But at 22, he was just as inexperienced in such matters as I was. He had no clue what was really going on. Then Sitch understood. He thought you wanted to hurt him? Yeah, I see you, buddy. Go play in your room. I think all young women are cursed with a streak of unrelenting foolishness, and all young men are cursed with a streak of absolute stupidity. He didn't see my obsession with him as love, but thought I meant him bodily harm. It was, to say the least, a very painful comedy of errors. I suppose I can understand how my advances could be misunderstood in that way. I do admit that I was an odd girl, intense to the point of being off-putting. I think you've grown into your intensity, Citra said. That I have. In any case, he wrote of his paranoid concerns about me in his Scythe's journal, then tore it out the next day, when I broke down and confessed my love the eyeball-rolling melodrama. She sighed and shook her head. I was hopeless. He, on the other hand, was a gentleman, told me that he was flattered, which is the last thing any teenage girl wants to hear, and let me down as easily as he could. I lived in his house and remained his apprentice for 2 more awkward months. Then, when I was ordained and became Honorable Scythe Marie Curie, we parted ways. We would nod and say hello to each other at conclave. Then, nearly 50 years later, when we both had turned our first corner and were seeing the world through youthful eyes once more, but this time with the wisdom of age on our side, we became lovers. Such a grin. You broke the 9th commandment. We told ourselves we didn't. We had told ourselves we were never partners, just companions of convenience. 2 like-minded people who shared a lifestyle that others simply couldn't understand. The lifestyle of a scythe. Still, we knew enough to keep it secret. That was when he first showed me the page he had written and torn out in his youth. He had held on to that ridiculous journal entry like a poorly penned love letter, never sent. We kept our relationship secret for 7 years. Then Prometheus found out about it. The first world supreme blade? Oh, it wasn't just a regional scandal. It had worldwide implications. We were brought before the global conclave. We thought we might be the first Scythes to be actually stripped of our rings and hurled out of the Scythedom, perhaps even gleaned. But we had such stellar reputation, and Supreme Blade Prometheus saw fit to give us a less severe punishment. We were sentenced to 7 deaths, 1 for each year of our relationship. Then he forbade us to have contact with each other for the next 70 years. I'm sorry, said Citra. Don't be. We deserved it, and we understood. We needed to be made an example for the other Scythes, whom now might think twice before allowing love to interfere with their duty. 7 deaths, and 70 years later, many things had changed. We remained old friends after that, but nothing more. Scythe Curie seemed a mix of many emotions, but she folded them all away, like clothes that no longer fit, and closed the drawer. Citra suspected she never spoke of this to anyone else, and would probably never speak of it again. I should have known he'd never throw that page away, Scythe Curie said. They must have found it when they gleaned out his things. And Xenocrates thought he was writing about me. Scythe Curie considered that. Perhaps, but probably not. Xenocrates is not a stupid man. He may have suspected the true nature of that page, but truth didn't matter. He saw it as a means to an end, a way to discredit you in front of respected Scythes like Scythe Mandela, who heads the Bejeweling Committee, and thereby ensure that Scythe Goddard's apprentice would get the ring instead of you. Citra wanted to be angry at Rowan for this, but she knew, whatever else was going on in that head of his, this was not his doing. Why would Xenocrates even care? He's not one of Goddard's miserable crews of Scythes. He doesn't even seem to like Goddard, and clearly couldn't care less about me and Rowan. There are more cards in play that can be read at the moment, Scythe Curie said. All we know for sure is that you must stay out of sight until we can clear you of even the suggestion of wrongdoing. Just then, someone came to the door, startling Citra. She hadn't known anyone else was in the cabin. It was another Scythe, by the look of her, probably the one who owned the cabin. She was shorter than Scythe Curie. Her robe had an intricate pattern in many colors, red, black, and turquoise. It seemed less of a fabric and more of a tapestry, intricately woven. Citra wondered if all Schillergentine Scythes wore robes that seemed not just handmade, but lovingly made. The woman spoke in Spanish, and Scythe Curie responded in kind. I didn't know you spoke Spanish, said Citra after the Schillergentine Scythe had left. I speak 12 languages fluently, said Scythe Curie, a bit of pride in her voice. 12? Scythe Curie offered a mischievous grin. See, if you don't know as many languages when you've lived as long as I have. She took the tray from Citra's lap and set it on the nightstand. I thought we'd have more time, but the local Scythe authority is on their way. I doubt they know you're here, but they're sending scouts to every Scythe's home with DNA sweepers, figuring we must have some local help. So we're on the move again? Citra swung her feet off the bed and planted them on the ground. Her wrinkles ached, but only slightly. It was a good kind of ache. I can walk myself this time. Good, because you'll be doing a lot of that. Scythe Curie glanced out the window. No one was coming yet, but there was a tension in her voice that wasn't there before. I'm afraid I won't be coming with you, Citra. If I'm to clear your name, I need to go back home and rally as many Scythes as I can. But the local Schillergentine Scythe, what can they do to me? I am breaking no commandment. All they can do is wag the naughty finger at me and refuse to wave goodbye as I drive to the airport. So, when you get home, you'll have to tell everyone the truth about the journal entry. I don't see what other choice I have. Of course, the Xenocrates will claim that I'm lying to protect you, but most will take my word over his. Hopefully, that will embarrass him enough to withdraw the claim. So, where can I go? asked Citra. I have an idea about that. Then Scythe Curie reached into a drawer and pulled out a rough woven burlap frock of a tonist. You want me to pretend to be a tone, part of the tone cult? A lone pilgrim, they're very common in this part of the world. You'll be a nameless, faceless wanderer. It wasn't the most glamorous of disguises, but Citra knew it was practical. No one would look in her eye for fear of getting an earful of tonist waddle. She would hide in plain sight and come home just before winter conclave. If Scythe Curie hadn't cleared her name by then, it wouldn't matter anyway. She wasn't about to spend her whole life in hiding. Then the Argentine Scythe burst in again, and this time much more agitated than before. "They're here," Scythe Curie said. She reached into her robe and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, pressing it into Citra's palm. "There's somewhere I want you to go, somewhere you need to see. The address is on that paper. Consider it the final part of your training." Thank you for the like. Citra grabbed the frock, and while Scythe Curie hurried Citra out of the room and to the back door. The Argentinian Scythe went to the weapons wardrobe and quickly filled a sack with concealable blades and firearms for Citra, the way a worried mother might fill her child's bag with snacks. There's a public car in a shed at the bottom of the hill. Take it and head north," Scythe Curie said. Citra opened the back door and stepped out. It was cold but bearable. "Listen to me carefully," said Scythe Curie. "It's a long trip, and you're going to need your wits about you to get where you're going." Then Scythe Curie went on to give Citra the instructions she'd need to make the journey of many thousands of miles. But she was cut short by the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. "Go! As long as you keep moving, you'll be safe." "And what do I do when I get there?" Scythe Curie met her eye with a hard gaze that revealed nothing but added importance to her words. A tonist might call it resonance. "When you get there, you'll know what to do." Then there came that all too familiar pounding on the front door. Citra bounded down the snowy hillside. Careening off pines in her way. The aches in her joints reminded her that she was still a few hours shy of a complete healing. She found the shed, and the public car was there just as Scythe Curie had promised. It was powered up for her as she got in, and it asked for a destination. She wasn't foolish enough to give it one. "North," she told it. "Just north." As she sped off, she heard an explosion, and then another. She looked back, but all she could see was black smoke just beginning to rise above the treetops. Dread began to fill her. A man wearing a robe similar to the one Scythe Curie's friend wore burst from the trees and into the road behind her. She saw him for only an instant, then the road took a sharp turn, and he was gone from sight. Only after the public car had worn its way down the mountain pass and was on a main road did she look at the paper that Scythe Curie had given her. For a moment, it felt as if her bones had spontaneously reshattered. But the feeling passed and settled into jaded resolve. She understood now. "When you get there, you'll know what to do." Yes, she most certainly would. She stared at the piece of paper for a moment more. She needed only to memorize the address because she already knew the name. Gerald Vandergans. The Thunderhead had spoken to her, and now so had Scythe Curie. There was a long journey ahead of Citra, and at the end of it, much work to be done. Citra couldn't glean, but she could exact vengeance. She would find a way to deliver justice to the Scythe killer one way or another. Never was she so thankful to have a sack full of weapons. This was a matter too delicate to be left to the blade guard, and although San Martin detested being used as a mere enforcement agent, he also knew that catching this mid-American girl would be a feather in his cap. He knew the girl was there even before he knocked on the door. His associate, an overenthusiastic junior Scythe named Bello, had already turned on the DNA detector and picked up traces the moment they stepped out of the car. San Martin drew his weapon as he approached the cabin, a pistol he'd had since the day he was ordained, given to him by his mentor. It was his weapon of choice for all gleanings, an extension of who he was. And although he didn't expect there'd be anyone to glean today, it made him feel a whole to have it drawn. Besides, gleaning aside, it might be necessary to incapacitate someone. Although he had been warned not to render anyone, especially the girl, deadish, because that had created the very fiasco he was now attempting to resolve. He pounded on the door and pounded again. He was ready to kick it in, when none other than Scythe Marie Curie herself came to the door. San Martin tried not to be starstruck. The Marquesa de la Muerte was well known throughout the world for her early achievements, a living legend everywhere, not just in the north. "There is a doorbell, or didn't you notice?" she said in Spanish, so perfect it threw San Martin off his game. "Are you here for lunch?" He stammered for a moment, deepening his disadvantage, then recovered as best he could. "We're here for the girl," he said. "No sense denying she's here, we already know." And he gestured toward Bello, whose DNA detector was pinging in the red. She glanced at San Martin's raised pistol and humphed. With such authority, he found himself lowering it almost involuntarily. "She was here," Curie said, "but not anymore. She's on her way to an Antarctic resort for some skiing. You might catch your flight if you hurry, though." The shrill Argentine Scythedom was not known for its sense of humor, and San Martin was no exception. He would not be made a fool of, even by one of the greats. He pushed his way past her into the cabin, where shrill Argentine Scythe, whose name he couldn't remember, stood as defiantly as Scythe Curie. "Search all you want," said the Scythe, "but if you break anything—" She never got to finish the thought, because Bello, overzealous as ever, jabbed her with a jolt baton and left her unconscious. "Was that really necessary?" chided Scythe Curie. "It's me you have a gripe with, not poor Ava." On a hunch, San Martin went out the back door, and sure enough found telltale footprints in the snow. "She's on foot," he told Bello. "Aporte. Operate. I don't know how to say that." "She can't have gotten far." Scythe Bello launched into pursuit like a bloodhound, heading down the snowy hillside, disappearing into trees. San Martin went back inside, hurrying to the front door. The road wound down that hill. If Bello couldn't catch her on foot, perhaps San Martin could head her off in the car. Scythe Curie, however, stood in the doorway, barring his way. He raised his weapon again, and in response she pulled out her own, a handgun with a stubbly muzzle wide enough to fit a golf ball in the barrel. A mortar pistol. He might as well have had a pea shooter against that thing. But he didn't lower his weapon, no matter how outclassed it was. "I have special permission for our high blade to fire on you if necessary," he warned her. "And I have no permission from anyone," said Scythe Curie, "but I am more than happy to do the same." They let their standoff for more heartbeats than felt advisable. Then Scythe Curie turned her gun aside and fired at the front door. An explosion blew in the front windows of the cabin. The shockwave knocking San Martin to the ground, and yet Scythe Curie, still in the doorway, barely flinched. San Martin scrambled to the door to see the blast from the mortar pistol. To see that the blast from the mortar pistol had turned his car into a bonfire. Then she fired again, this time blowing up her own car. "Well now," she said, "I suppose you'll have to stay for lunch." He looked at the two flaming vehicles inside, knowing he'd be a laughingstock for his failure today. He looked at Scythe Curie, her steely gray eyes, her calm control of the situation, and realized he never really stood a chance against the Marquesa de la Muerte. There wasn't much he could do but glare at her in heartfelt disapproval. "Very bad," he said, wagging a finger. Very, very bad. Yet, even in dreams, I often find myself gleaning. I have one dream that recurs far too often. I am walking on an unfamiliar street that I feel I should know, but don't. I have a pitchfork, which I've never used in real life, and its awkward tines are not well suited for gleaning, and when it strikes, it reverberates, giving off a sound that is something between ringing and moaning, like the numbing vibration of a tonus bident. There is a woman before me who I must glean. I jab at her, yet the pitchfork fails to do the job. Her wounds are healed instantaneously. She is not upset or frightened, nor is she amused. She is simply resigned to stand there, allowing me to futilely attempt to end her life. She opens her mouth to speak, but her voice is soft and her words are drowned out by the fork's ghastly moans, so I never hear her. And I always wake up screaming. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 32. Troubled Pilgrimage. All public cars on the grid, but Scythe can't take their track movements until the navigational data is dropped into the back brain. That happens every 60 minutes, so that's how often you'll have to change cars. Scythe Curie's instructions had come at such quickly. She only hoped she could remember them all. She could do this. Her apprenticeship had taught her to be self-sufficient and resourceful. She ditched the first public car at a small town right on time. She was worried that there might not be as many vacant public cars in the Shell Argentine region, especially this remote an area, but the Thunderhead was remarkable at projecting local need. In all things, there always seemed to be a supply to fit the demand. She had already changed into the coarse tonus frock and had pulled its hood over her head. It was remarkable how people would have avoided her. Vehicle changes every hour meant that her pursuers were always right behind her. She realized she had to cut a weaving course like cargo ships in Mortal Age wartime to throw them off her path and keep them from anticipating where she'd be next. For over a day she could never sleep for more than an hour at a time. In several instances there was only road and no civilization for long stretches. She had to be crafty, ditching the car before arriving in town, where Shell Argentine Scythe and officers of the local Blade Guard were already waiting for her. She actually walked right past one Scythe, certain she'd be caught. But she was smart enough to cross downwind of his DNA detector. The fact that the Scythes themselves were supervising the hunt and not just leaving it to the Blade Guard made Citra feel all the more terrified, yet oddly important too. Once you reach Buenos Aires, take the hypertrain north across Amazonia to the city of Caracas. As soon as you cross the border into Amazonia, you'll be safe. They won't lift a finger to help Xenocrates or to detain you. Citra knew the reason for this from her historical studies. Too many Scythes from other regions glean out of their jurisdictions while on vacation in Amazonia. There's no law against it, but it has made the Amazonia Scythedom uncooperative and openly obstructionist when it comes to assisting Scythes from any other region. The problem was the train in Buenos Aires. They'd be waiting for her in force at every train station and airport. She was saved by a group of Tonists headed to Isthmus. "We seek the great fork in the umbilical between north and south," they told her, thinking she was one of them. "There are rumors it is hidden in the ancient engineering work. We believe it could be sealed within one of the gates of the Panama Canal." It took all her will not to laugh. "Will you join us, sister?" And so she did, just long enough to board the train north right under the nose of more watchful eyes than she could count, holding her breath, not out of fear, but so she wouldn't trip any DNA detectors in the station. There were 7 Tonists in the group. Apparently, this branch of the cult only traveled in small groups of 7 or 12, as per musical mathematics, but they were willing to break the rule and add her to their number. Their accent suggested they weren't from American continents, but somewhere in Euroscandia. "Where have your journeys taken you?" one of them asked, a man who seemed the leader. He smiled whenever he spoke, which made him all the more off-putting. "Here and there," she told him. "What is your quest?" "My quest? Don't all wandering pilgrims have quests?" "Yes," she said. "I seek an answer to the burning question. Is it A flat or G sharp?" And one of the others says, "Don't even get me started." There were no windows, for there was no scenery to see in the surface vacuum tube. Citra had traveled by air and on standard maglev trains, but the narrow, claustrophobic nature of the hypertrain made her uneasy. Latonus, who must have been used to all sorts of travels, weren't bothered. They discussed legends, debating which were true and which were false, and which were somewhere between. "We've been from the pyramids in Arabia to the Great Wall of Pan-Asia in search of clues to the Great Fork's whereabouts," their leader said. "It's the pilgrimage that matters. I doubt any of us would know what to do if we actually found it." Once the train reached a cruising speed of 800 miles per hour, Citra excused herself to use the restroom, where she splashed water on her face, trying not to let exhaustion overtake her. She had forgotten to lock the door. Had she done that, her journey might have played out much differently. A man burst in on her. Her initial thought was just that he didn't know someone was there, but before she could turn, before she could do much of anything, he had a gold-edged blade at her throat, positioned to do the most damage. "You have been selected for gleaning," he said, speaking in common, but with a pronounced accent that must have been Portugonian, which was the primary language of Amazonia. His robe was a deep forest green, and she remembered reading somewhere that Scythes of that region all wore the same green robe. "You're making a mistake," Scythe said before he could slice open her neck. "Then tell me my mistake," he said, "but be quick about it." She tried to come up with something that would stay. "I love you." "I love you much more." But she realized there was nothing else. "I'm a Scythe's apprentice. If you tried to glean me, I would just be revived, and you would be disciplined for not checking your ring first to see if I had immunity." He smiled. "It is as I thought. You're the only one they're all looking for." He took the blade away from her neck. "Listen to me carefully. There are Shildratinian Scythes aboard this train, disguised as regular passengers. You can't avoid them, but if you wish to remain out of their clutches, I suggest you come with me." Citra's instinct was to tell him no, and that she'd be fine on her own. But her judgment pulled rank on instinct, and she went with him. He led her to the next car, where even though the train was crowded, there was an empty seat beside him. He introduced himself as Scythe Posuelo of Amazonia. "What now?" "What now?" Citra asked. "We wait." Citra pulled her hood over her head, and sure enough, a few minutes later, a man made his way forward from the very back car, dressed like any other traveler, but moving slowly and consulting an object in his palm that looked like a phone but was not. "Don't flee," whispered Scythe Posello to Citra. "Give him no control of the situation." The device began to click like a Geiger counter as the man reached them, and he stopped, his quarry found. "Citra Terranova," he said. Citra calmly removed her hood. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't let that show. "Congratulations," she said. "You found me. Gold star for you." He was thrown off by the expression, but that didn't stop him. "I'm taking you into custody." He pulled out a jolt baton. "Do not try to resist. It will only make it worse for you." Now Scythe Posuelo turned to him. "On whose authority do you do this?" "On the joint authority of Lautaro, High Blade of the Chilogernian region, and High Blade of Xenocrates of Mid-America, neither of which have any jurisdiction here." He chuckled. "Excuse me, but—" "No, excuse me," said Posuelo, with just the right level of indignation. "We crossed into Amazonia at least 5 minutes ago. If you attempt to press your advantage in any way, she has every right to defend herself with lethalish force, even against a scythe." Citra took that as a cue to pull out a hunting knife she was concealing in her frock, and she stood to face him. "Make one move with that baton, and they'll have to reattach your hand." Behind him, a porter came into the train car to see what the commotion was. "Sir," said Citra, "this man is a Chilogernian Scythe, but isn't wearing his ring or robe. Isn't that against the law in Amazonia?" Never had Citra been so happy to have studied her Scythe history. The porter looked the man over, and his eyes narrowed a suspicious glare, suspicious enough for Citra to know where his allegiances lay. "Furthermore, all foreign Scythes must register before crossing our border," he said, "even when sneaking in by tunnel." The Chilogernian Scythe's temper quickly began to boil. "Leave me to my business, or I will glean you where you stand." "No, you won't," said Scythe Posuelo, with such a matter-of-fact calm that made Citra grin. "I've granted him immunity. You can't glean him." "What?" Then the Amazonian Scythe reached his hand right up to the porter's face, who grabbed it and kissed his ring. "Thank you, Your Honor." "This man threatened violence against me," Citra told the porter. "I demanded he be put off the train at the next stop, along with any other disguised scythes he's traveling with." "That would be my pleasure," said the porter. "You can't do that," Scythe insisted, but a few minutes later he found out otherwise. With her pursuers kicked off the train, Citra enjoyed a respite from the relentless cat-and-mouse game. Her cover blown, she pulled on street clothes that fit her from someone's luggage. Jeans and a flowery blouse that wasn't her style, but the clothes were adequate. The Tonists were disappointed, yet didn't seem all that surprised that she wasn't actually one of them. They left her with a pamphlet she promised she'd read, but suspected she wouldn't. "Whatever your destination," Scythe Posuelo told her, "you'll have to change trains at the Amazonas Central Station. I suggest you meander through several different bound trains before boarding the one you're actually taking, so that the DNA detectors will send those chasing you every which way." Smart man. Of course, the more she wandered the station, the more likely she'd be seen. But it was worth the risk to confound the DNA detectors and send her pursuers on a wild goose chase. "I don't know why they're after you," Scythe Posuelo said as the train pulled into the station. "But if your issue's resolved, and you do get your ring, you should come back to Amazonia. The rainforest stretches across the whole continent, as it did in its most ancient days, and we live in its canopy. You would find it marvelous." "I thought you didn't like foreign scythes," she told him with a smirk. "There is a difference between those we invite and those who intrude." Citra did her best to leave DNA traces on half a dozen trains before slipping onto the one bound for Caracas on the North Amazonia coast. There were agents out there looking for her. She didn't spot them, but she wouldn't be so cavalier as to think she was out of harm's way. From the city of Caracas, Scythe Curie had instructed her to follow the northern coastline east until coming to a town called Playa Pintada. She would have to avoid public cars or any other mode of transportation that would pinpoint her location, but she found the closer she got, the more her resolve hardened. She would get there and complete this troubled pilgrimage, even if she had to walk the rest of the way. How does one face a murderer? Not a socially sanctioned killer, but an actual murderer. An individual who, without the blessing of society, or even its permission, permanently ends a human life. Citra knew that in the world at large, the Thunderhead prevented such things. Certainly, people get pushed in front of trains or under trucks or off rooftops in the heat of frustrated moments, but that which is broken is always repaired. Amends are made. An ordained Scythe, however, who lives outside of the Thunderhead's jurisdiction, has no such protection. To be revived is not automatic for a Scythe, and it must be requested. But who is there to advocate for a Scythe felled by foul play? Which means that although Scythes may be the most powerful humans on Earth, they are also the most vulnerable. Today, Citra vowed to be an advocate for the dead. She would deliver justice for her fallen mentor. Clearly, the Thunderhead would not stand in her way. It had given her the murderer's name. So had Scythe Curie when she had sent her on this mission. The final phase of her training. Everything rested on the actions she would take today. fucking kidding me? Playa Pintada, the painted beach. Today, the coastline was strewn with large chunks of twisted, gnarled driftwood. In the dwindling sunset, they seemed like the arms and legs of terrible creatures slowly heaving themselves out of the sand. Citra crouched behind a driftwood dragon, hiding within its shadow. A storm was moving from the north, building over the sea, and rolling inexorably toward the shore. Distant lightning could already be seen playing deep within its darkness, and thunder rolled in counterpoint to the crashing surf. She had only a handful of the weapons she had started with: a pistol, a switchblade, the hunting knife. The rest had been too hard to conceal, and she had to cast them off before boarding the train in Buenos Aires. It was barely a day ago, and it yet felt like a week. The home she watched was a single-story box of dwelling, like many of the homes on the beach. Most of it was hidden behind palms and blooming birds of paradise. There was a black patio that overlooked the beach on the other side of a low hedge. Lights were on inside. A shadow periodically moved behind the curtains. Citra reviewed her options. Were she already a Scythe, she would glean him, following Scythe Curie's methods. A blade through the heart, quick and decisive. There was one instance where she didn't doubt her ability to do it, but she wasn't a Scythe. Any lethal attack would merely render him deadish, and an ambudrone would arrive within minutes to take him to be revived. What she needed to do was incapacitate him, take him down but not out, and then extract a confession. Was he working for another Scythe or acting alone? Was he bribed like the witnesses? Was he motivated by a promise of immunity, or was it a personal vendetta against Faraday? Then, once she knew the truth, she could bring the man and the confession to Scythe Posuelo, or anyone in the Amazonia Scythedom. That way, not even Xenocrates could squelch the truth. Excuse me. At the last traces of twilight, she heard the sliding glass door whish open, and she peered over the rough edge of the driftwood to see him come out to the patio to look out at the approaching storm. He was perfectly silhouetted against the light inside, like a paper target at a shooting range. He couldn't have made it easier for her. She pulled out her pistol. At first, she leveled it right at his heart, force a habit from her training. Then she lowered it to his knee and fired. Her aim was perfect. He wailed and went down, and Citra raced across the sand, leaped the hedge, and grabbed him by the shirt with both hands as he writhed. "You're going to pay for what you've done," she snarled. Then she saw the man's face. Familiar. Too familiar. Her first instinct was to think this was another layer of treachery. It wasn't until he spoke that he had to accept the truth. Citra? Scythe Faraday's face was a mask of pain and disbelief. Citra, oh God, what are you doing here? She let go out of shock, and Scythe Faraday's head hit the concrete hard, knocking him out and making the horror of the moment all the worse. She lifted his head again, cradling it gently as the blood from his shattered knee flowed between the patio stones, turning the sand in the cracks to red mortar, drying to brown. Immortality cannot temper the folly or frailty of youth. Innocence is doomed to die as senseless death at our own hands, as casualty of the mistakes we can never undo. So we laid to rest the wide-eyed wonder we once thrived upon, replacing it with scars of which we never speak, too knotted for any amount of technology to repair. With each gleaning I commit, with each life taken for the good of humanity, I mourn for the boy I once was, whose name I sometimes struggle to remember. And I long for a place beyond immortality, where I can, in some small measure, resurrect the wonder, and be that boy again. From the Grilling Journal of H.S. Faraday. Chapter 33. Both the Messenger and the Message. Sister carried him inside. She set him on a sofa and made a tourniquet to staunch the blood. He groaned, beginning to ruse. And when he broke the tenuous surface of consciousness, His first thought was her. "You should not be here," he said, his words weak and slurred, an effect of his pain and eyes flooding his system. Still he grimaced in blurry agony. What you reading?
Reading?
Mm-hmm.
Guess why?
'Cause I like to. Sorry about that. That was my 3-year-old. "We have to get you to a hospital," she told him. "This is too much for you nanites to handle." "Nonsense. They've already taken off the edge off the pain. As for healing, they'll do the job without intervention." "But I have no other option," he told her. "Going to a hospital will alert the Scythedom that I'm still alive." He shifted position, grimacing only slightly. "Between nature and nanites, my knee will heal. It will just take time, of which I have no shortage." He elevated his leg, bandaged it, then sat on the floor beside him. "Were you so resentful of my leaving that you had to exact your revenge in flesh?" she asked, only half joking. "Are you so offended that I managed a method of secretly retiring instead of actually cleaning myself?" "I thought you were someone else," she told him. "Someone named Gerald van der Gans." "My birth name," he told her, "a name I surrendered when I became Honorable Scythe Michael Faraday. But none of this explains your presence here. I freed you, Citra, you and Rowan both. By faking my own gleaning, you were both freed from your apprenticeship. You should be back in your old life, forgetting that I had plucked you from it. So why are you here?" "You mean you don't know?" He pulled himself up slightly so he could see her more directly. "Don't know what?" And so she told him everything. How, instead of being freed, she and Rowan had ended up at Scythe, Curie, and Goddard. And how Xenocrates had tried to pin Faraday's murder on her. Excuse me, sorry. And how Scythe Curie had helped her get to him. As she spoke, he put his hands to his eyes as if he might gouge them out. "To think I was complacent here while all this was going on. How could you not know?" she asked him, for in her mind he always seemed to know everything, even the things he could not possibly know. Scythe Faraday sighed. "Marie, Scythe Curie, that is the only member of this. I am completely off-grid now. The only way to reach me would be in person. So she sent you. You are both the messenger and the message." The moment became uncomfortable. Thunder rumbled in from the sea, much closer now. The flashes of lightning brighter. "Is it true you died 7 deaths for her?" Citra asked. He nodded. "And her for me." "She told you that, did she?" "Well, it was a very long time ago." Outside, the rain finally began to fall, surging its fits and starts. "I love the way it rains here," he told her. "It reminds me that some forces of nature can never entirely be subdued. They are eternal, which is a far better thing to be than immortal." And so they sat listening to the soothing randomness of the rain until Citra began to grow too weary to even think. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Very simple, actually. I heal and you rest. Anything beyond that is a conversation for a future date." Then he pointed. "The bedroom's in there. I expect a full night's sleep from you, followed by a recitation of your poisons in the morning, in order of toxicity." "My poisons?" In spite of his pain and drug-induced haze, Scythe Faraday smiled. "Yes, your poisons. Are you my apprentice or not?" Citra couldn't help but smile right back at him. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." The longer we live, the quicker the days seem to pass. How troublesome that is when we live forever. A year seems to pass in a matter of weeks. Decades fly with no milestones to mark them. We become settled in the inconsequential drudgery of our lives until suddenly we look at ourselves in the mirror and see a face we barely recognize, begging us to turn a corner and be young again. But are we truly young when we turn the corner? We hold the same memories, the same habits, the same unrealized dreams. Our bodies may be spry and in limber, but toward what end? No end. Never an end. I do believe mortals strived more heartily toward their goals, because they knew that time was of the essence. But us, we can put things off far more effectively than those doomed to die, because death has become the exception instead of the rule. Stagnation that I so fervently glean on a daily basis seems an epidemic that only grows. There are times I feel I am fighting a losing battle against an old-fashioned apocalypse of the living dead. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Old-fashioned apocalypse of the living dead. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Winter sped relentlessly closer. At first, Rowan kept a tally of the lives temporarily ended, but as the days passed, he found he couldn't keep up. A dozen a day, week to week, month to month.